All right, we're going to continue on with Unit 8 with looking at Section 8.8, which deals with the origins of life. According to science, the Earth was formed with a collision or from a collision with a Mars-sized planet, and it caused the Earth to melt. And as the Earth melted, the most dense materials kind of sunk to the center of the Earth and became the core, and the least dense materials moved towards the outside, which became the crust and the atmosphere. So the atmosphere was composed of hydrogen cyanide, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, nitrogen, hydrogen sulfide, and water. As the Earth cooled, the oceans were formed. Water vapor, of course, condensed from the atmosphere, and constant rains formed the Earth's oceans. And primitive Earth had no free oxygen. So the Miller-Urey experiment or the purpose of this experiment was to prove that organic materials could come from the materials present in the atmosphere of primitive Earth. The steps of this experiment. So the early gases were combined with water vapor. Electric sparks were then run through these gases. The electric sparks, of course, simulated lightning. The gas then passed through a condenser, which simulated the cooling of the Earth, and non-water liquid was collected as it was cooling in this condenser, and this liquid was found to contain amino acids, which of course are the building blocks for proteins, which are going to be the building blocks for life. Protenoid microspheres are bubbles with selectively permeable membranes that can form in solutions under certain conditions. And these are thought to be the precursors to cell membranes. And these are some things that were found within the liquid that was collected in the experiment that we talked about on the last slide. So the first nucleic acids, of course, would be RNA, and we've learned up to this point that RNA is a little bit more simple than DNA, and mainly because it's a half strand. So RNA is important for the storage and replication of information, easy to replicate, easy to store. First RNA molecules acted as enzymes to speed up reactions. Eventually would be essential in the creation of DNA, and then of course DNA is more stable than RNA, thus would be selected for against organisms with RNA only. So organisms with only RNA would have a harder time surviving as the Earth began to change. First organisms would have been anaerobic. Anaerobics or anaerobes do not need oxygen to live. No oxygen in the first atmosphere, so oxygen would only have been or would have been poisonous to early life forms. The first life forms would have been photosynthetic. So, as these first life forms did photosynthesis using the carbon dioxide, they, of course, we've learned this, gave off oxygen as a byproduct. So, oxygen would begin to build up in the atmosphere due to the creatures producing it as a waste product. This gave way to the formation of the ozone layer. So oxygen in the atmosphere combines with UV radiation from the sun to create ozone, which is O3. The ozone blocks the sun's radiation, which makes it safer for creatures to be on the surface of the water. And as creatures were able to become more protected on the surface of the water, it gave way to creatures moving out of the water onto land. This then gave way to aerobes as the amount of oxygen built up in the atmosphere. So creatures on the surface of the water would lead to some organisms using oxygen, and they were called aerobic or aerobes. These are the first creatures to use a form of cellular respiration as a way to obtain energy. And then this gives way to something we've talked about as well, which is the endosymbiosis theory. So this was the idea that eukaryotic cells arose from the combination of several prokaryotic cells. Primitive animal cells arose from the combination of one large cell with a small cell. The large cell would use the smaller cell cellular respiration machinery to fuel its own energy needs, forming an interdependent relationship. The two cells would eventually, over time, become one cell or one organism. Primitive plant cells arose from the combination of primitive animal cells with a smaller photosynthetic organisms. Remember that the first organisms were very small, very simplistic, but they were photosynthetic. So cells that already contain primitive mitochondria would be larger than other photosynthetic cells. The larger cells would engulf the smaller ones and are the smaller photosynthetic organisms, and the larger cell would then use the smaller cell's ability to make food using light. This would be the precursor to the first chloroplasts and the first plant cells, which then cause the domino effect for life to continue to develop. And that is the end of 8.8. There is a short form that goes with this. Please be sure to complete it. And if you have any questions, let me know. Thank you.